Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege and honor to be part of this wonderful conference. I would like to thank Guang, Ellen, and others who put so much time and heart to make this possible. I am sharing a small piece of research with you, and let me start by citing Professor Biming Singh's lecture last night. Toward the end of the lecture, he said there could be 3 paths for China to reach to the collapse of the one-party system. One is reform from above. Second is reform leads to revolution. Third is the revolution. And many scholars, including social movement scholars in sociology, they normally put lots of thinking on the question, is revolution coming? How likely? And I'm one of the social movement scholars. I ask slightly, very different question. I ask, if revolution comes, what will be next? Could be crackdown, bloody street, and then the same thing again, or something else? That's the question that motivates my recent research. But this research is huge. There are many pathways for revolutionary situation to become a revolution. By that, meaning to have regime change outcome. Could be different pathways. Could be coup d'etat, could be international pressure, could be reform-minded people to have a reform, or could be a Tiananmen Square all over again. So there are many aspects. I cannot cover it. I bring a piece of study with my student to share today. And I will give you context. Again, I'm not predicting, or I'm making a claim to solve the issue. I just bring one piece of research. My talk basically has 2 parts. One is trying to describe this chart to you, which essentially means when large-scale protests took place in Tiananmen Square, and normally in lots of other cases, the government will counter with the claims, try to describe the content of the protest claim. But the Chinese government basically did not do that much, but stick to the gun to say this is a counter-revolutionary conspiracy. And that in every turn of this interaction, the government response did not only not discourage participation, but inflame the size and the disruption of the event. And that's the first part. The second part, I will try to explore a few hypotheses to explain why that's the case. I don't have time, and nor do I need to belabor what Tiananmen Square movement is. Many veterans are still here. But there are essential elements we remember. The military was used, and the thousands died, and many people persecuted. And even that, contrary to many people who were on the street, myself included, thought, oh, if you open fire, the regime will collapse. By what mechanism? Assumption was people may rise to overthrow the government. People may include military or workers or peasants or students. But that did not happen. So why? But the research doesn't try to account for why that did not happen. But I'm trying to document the strategy of the government to respond. So there are moments, some of you probably vividly remember those moments. There are probably fun, it's too small, I'll tell you what it is. The first big peak is after the editorial of April 26th. The second day, that's the first peak of huge student protests. The second peak was there following the hunger strike. And the government did not only give the sympathy or recognize some of the reasons behind the hunger strike or the protest. It continued to accuse the protest as a conspiracy and deny the right of protest. And that's the second peak. And third peak is the beginning of the martial law. And the fourth peak was in the middle of the martial law. And in all these cases, and there are patterns. Can you see some of them? What I'm showing here is, for social movement scholars, in many places, when protesters make claims and the government counterclaim, and we call frame and counterframing, there will be back and forth with context. And so for the protester side, there are multiple claims in many different times. But government partially respond to some of the contents. But if you look at the right, the first government claim, anti-system conspiracy, it is persistent all over the period during the 72, 60, 56 days of the protest. So to understand, I use those tables and charts to show the patterns are self-evident. So I don't engage in elaborate explanation. To understand why that was the case, it will be tempting to have the first hypothesis, which in sociology problems will be called a functionalist analysis. You assume that because the government knew the counterframing to treat the protest, to claim the protest as a counter-revolutionary conspiracy is the functional for the end of the prevent the revolution. But there are three more hypotheses that make more sense. The first one would be an institutional habit. Because before the Tiananmen Square movement, all the time when there was a dissent, the government always used the same thing. Regardless the situation, they use the same rhetoric. And then from the student the protest, they in fact even anger the students even more. Because for students like us, the fundamental issue quickly becomes whether we have the right to use this form of political participation. And secondary, for the student groups, particularly those leaders, if this framing doesn't change, the editorial, the deancing, or the tone setting doesn't change, it will mean the arrest and jailing of the leaders after the movement. So the continuation of the counterframing as conspiracy, in fact, has the power to inflame the participation. But the first hypothesis would be, this is institutional habit, they just do it at the moment. The second hypothesis will be so-called elite solidarity thesis, which most prominently featured by Professor Zhao Dixing in his book. He continued, legitimacy is being changed in the different factions. They work together to deal with it, and this discourse is coming from a solidarity rather than division of this elite. And the third hypothesis will be elite factionalism, which means the government was not coherent, there are different factions, and all this discourse is an outcome of one faction prevail over the other. And when Professor Zhao was writing in early 90s, there were not so many memoirs by the leaders like Li Peng, Chen Xitong, Zhao Ziyang. So his conclusion about elite solidarity thesis was more or less a guesswork. And later on, all these memoirs or purported memoirs became available, and they all attest to the validity of the elite factionalism thesis, which means the following. So instead of considering the regime has an interest to contain or to kill the protest, in fact, both factions have an interest to inflame the protest as a political bargaining chip. And at the end, on May 17, 1989, in a meeting when the standing committee members were voting, and the hardline factions prevailed with one vote over the reformist faction, and that was the martial law, 2 days of the martial law. And instead of considering counterframing need to speak to the potential protest participants, the counterframing by the Communist Party during the 1989, the audience, in fact, was more about military officers, the public at large, rather than students themselves. So, as an outcome, this conspiracy theory frame stick along the way, but it served some purpose when the violence crackdown was a viable option for an authoritarian regime to deal with large-scale protest. That's my presentation.